My name is Teresa, and today I wanted to talk about book recommendations based on very specific criteria. There are certain elements to books that really appeal to me, and if I know that it has a specific element in it, I am more likely to pick up a book. I'm more likely to enjoy said book. I know that there are others who are the same. Some people buy books based on their tropes. These recommendations that I want to explore are not based on tropes, but more motifs used throughout the stories, at least in this specific case that we're about to discuss. The element that I want to discuss today, I initially entitled Enchanted Forests, but looking at the list that I've compiled, I realized that they are more cursed forests that I'm drawn to. On the surface, I see forests as an element that can represent the wild and untamable. But I used my creative writing degree, my English degree, to delve deeper into that, and I found a an article that was published in, I believe, some sort of zine that really goes into depth the appeal of the enchanted, cursed, fantastical forest in speculative fiction. And I wanted to discuss that just a little before going into these books that I'm about to recommend to you. So I found this on Google, and more specifically, the URL is dc.swosu.edu, and it is published on Mythlore, a journal of J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Charles Williams, and poetic literature. Honestly, I don't know what that word means. Let's learn, shall we? Mythopia, or mythopaesis, is a narrative genre in modern literature and film where an artificial or fictionalized mythology is created by the writer of prose, poetry, or other literary form. The concept, which long pre-existed him, was widely popularized by J.R.R. Tolkien. So it was, this article that I'm about to go over was published in a journal based on that. So the article itself was published in October of 2017, and it's called Into the Wild Woods on the Significance of Trees and Forests in Fantasy Fiction. And it is by Weronika Łaszkiewicz from the University of Białystok, Poland. I'm sure I butchered every single word I just said. So it's by a Polish scholar. So Łaszkiewicz starts her article off with, among the various elements of the natural world which in fantasy fiction become invested with otherworldly powers, trees and forests particularly often undergo transformations which elevate them from the domain of the natural into that of the supernatural. Consequently, their appearance in fantastic narrative as animated characters in magical woodlands strengthens the enchanting and estranging appeal of a story. Yet it is a misconception, born perhaps from too many formulaic fantasy novels, to perceive the trees and forests of fantasy as hardly anything else than amusing, but otherwise insignificant characters, or as secretive groves, a staple element of fantastic world building, preferably inhabited by elves, whom every hero is obliged to visit during their journey. In the following paper, I wish to explore how numerous fantasists, particularly those writing in the subgenres of high/epic fantasy and mythic fiction, draw upon and creatively reconstruct arboreal tree imagery present in myths and fairy tales, not only to enrich their secondary worlds, but also to investigate issues pertaining to psychology and religion, to question mankind's relationships with the environment, and to convey their deep appreciation of nature. The analysis of a number of examples will illustrate the variety of roles and functions ascribed to fantastic trees and forests. The proposed analysis will be preceded by a brief summary of arboreal literal tree imagery appearing in myths and fairy tales, and followed by an inquiry into the meaning behind the genre's persistence in depicting fantastic trees and forests. The article then goes on to explore all of these different examples of fantasy that utilizes trees and how they ascribe a different meaning to those trees, and how it expands the world and really brings life and really enhances the story. If that interests you, I will link that article below, but I want to focus on the points of it that really spoke to me and gives an insight into why I am about to recommend the books that I am about to recommend. At the end of her paper, Veronika really summarizes and captures the reason why I think that the element of the cursed or enchanted forest appeals to me in the books that I read. The examples provided in this paper do not exhaust, of course, the long list of marvelous trees and forests appearing in contemporary fantasy fiction. Nonetheless, they illustrate the genre's diverse tree imagery to a large extent grounded in the tradition of myths and fairy tales. The sacred trees of fantasy fiction are the embodiment of the numinous and a significant element of divine creation. They may serve as the threshold between life and death, and those heroes who experience the agony of death on the sacred tree return to life with new knowledge and power. The loss of the sacred tree may disrupt the people's relations with their creator and signify the beginning of a transformative period in the history of their world. The forests of fantasy fiction are usually dangerous liminal spaces in which heroes may encounter something fantastic and marvelous or undergo a painful yet necessary metamorphosis which will reestablish not only their identity but also their relationship with their community and the world. I thought that was beautifully put, and I really could not have said it better myself. So one of my more recent reads that I very much feel encaptures the cursed enchanted forest is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. The Jasmine Throne is a multi-POV fantasy inspired by the history and epics of India, and it features mainly two protagonists who are queer, and one, Priya, is a maidservant who has ties to a order that has been usurped and destroyed by the empire that is now reigning. The order has a deep connection to a river and these sacred trees, while the empire worships a deity that is represented by fire. So we have fire destroying trees, and it is a very, very good story. It took me a while to fully read it because I found the pacing very slow, but I did enjoy what was going on. I enjoyed both the characters of Priya and Malini. They were very different, where Priya is this kind and trusting person who has a deeper anger to her, and Malini is composed and is just seeking revenge and being taken advantage of. Well, not being abused. She is seeking revenge for the abuse inflicted on her by her brother, and I very much enjoyed the forest in it. The next book that I would recommend if you are looking for cursed enchanted forests is We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal. We Hunt the Flame is about two characters. It's dual POV, and we follow Nasir and Zafira. And Zafira is a hunter who is the only one in her area who is brave enough to enter the cursed forest of ours to feed her people. So we start immediately in a cursed forest, and the book is about Zafira having to go on this journey past the ours to recover magic and dispel the cursed forest. And it was a book that I read a few years ago, and at first I thought it was very slow. the beginning, I was like, man, this book drags and drags and drags. But then something happens and I was so surprised, and I kept reading and I liked it. This is a completed duology, fantasy YA, and it's really good. Check it out. The next few books that I am going to recommend, I read on Kindle, so I do not have a physical copy with me. The first of which is For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten, and I rated this just a 3-star. I thought it was solid, but it didn't necessarily have that punch to it that really gave me what I wanted. But I did find it endearing because the forest is a main component in this story. We have another dual POV, this time with 2 sisters. We have the second daughter, Red, and her sister, whose name I forget. Sorry. Red, being the second daughter, she has to take up this mantle of being a sacrifice for the wolf that lives in the wilder wood. The part that I very much enjoyed about this was the curse and how it was connected to the religion of it all. This is very focused on Red and her romance with the wolf. It kind of has a Little Red Riding Hood retelling vibe of it going on by the cover and other aspects of the story, but I thought that the religion established was very, very interesting. The perception and all of that characters had of the religion, of the woods, and of how it is dangerous and the wolf inside of it is dangerous, very much like the mythology of the world. The execution of a lot of elements was left a little bit to be desired in my opinion, but if you like romance, if you like Halsin from Baldur's Gate, and if you like Cursed Forest, then I suggest taking a look at this one. Next up is a recent release. It released in April of this year, and I had the pleasure of reading an arc of it before it came out, and that is Your Blood, My Bones by Kelly Andrew. Another dual POV, this time with White and Peter. Peter is a semi-immortal, so we have those themes of rebirth coming in, and it is about White returning home to where there is a forest on the property in which she spent her summers as a child. It is her revisiting the past and new things coming to light while her and Peter come together and also fight a little bit to figure out how to stop the powerful ancient powers that live in the forest from overtaking not only the property of their childhood, but being unleashed upon the world. Again, cursed, scary forest. The romance in this was really nice. I really liked a lot of aspects of this. I rated it 4 stars. There were some things that I thought became a little bit redundant as the story went on, but overall, I very, very much enjoyed this book. Next is a YA psychological horror that I received as an e-arc that actually doesn't come out until October 29th of this year, and that is Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. It's right there in the title. There is a forest, and we follow our protagonist Andrew, who is a high school senior who is dealing with some trauma that happened to him last year at the boarding school he attends that we as the reader are not privy to. He is also dealing with the fact that he is in love with his best friend Thomas. And as well, a little bit of a spoiler alert, he is also dealing with the fact that he has these feelings, and he also realizes that he very well might be asexual. And so it is a exploration into sexuality as well as an exploration into dealing with trauma through fairy tales and also through these adventures that he has with adventures. I say that very lightly. They are horrible, terrible events that happen as these two boys are sneaking into the forest at night, fighting off these creatures made of decay and rot and forest that they thought only existed in their imagination. It was extremely captivating. I don't know how I feel about the ending. I did give it 4 stars. I'm very conflicted about this one. And I will say that this has heavy trigger warnings for eating disorders, unintentional self-harm, and a few other things that I cannot remember off the top of my head. But definitely look at the trigger warnings for this one because it's intense. But it's so good, and I really liked the twist of the fantastical cursed forest in this one. The last rec that I have is a fairly beloved one that many of you may have read, but if you have not, then immediately, expeditiously read The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This story takes place, it's sort of a historical fantasy. It takes place in the Russian wilderness, and we follow this family. Specifically, we follow the life of Vasilisa. We follow her as she is gifted with this sight to see the spirits of the old religion. Christianity is in full force at this time, and the old ways and the old religion of nature spirits is slowly dwindling. Vasilisa is this wild child who is drawn to the forest, and there are those who are trying to tame her, and there are those who are afraid of her, and she is this bridge between the old ways and the new. It is so good. I love The Bear and the Nightingale, and I love I always want to say Neverwinter, which is a fantasy town in D&D. The Winter Night trilogy is the first of the Winter Night trilogy, which is a completed series, and it's very good, and it gets a little bit more romantic in the other books, but the spirits of the forest are a big draw to me in these books. That is all for the book recs that I have. I would like to return to the article by Veronika, whose last name I cannot pronounce, and revisit her words, which I feel like captures the draw of the cursed forest way more than I can. At some level, the reoccurring tree imagery of fantasy fiction is of course only a generic trait which allows writers to produce marvelous worlds that will be immediately recognized by the reader as fantastic. Yet at a higher level, tree imagery is the means through which writers can direct readers' attention towards the natural world. Today, many people treat our planet's ecosystems as a commodity and acknowledge only their material and practical value. Of course, forests have supplied people with sustenance and resources for centuries, yet now more than ever, the environment is endangered by mankind's progress, because not only does our growing population require more and more space and resources, but also because we are slowly migrating into the cyberspace, where it is easy to forget about our connection with the rest of the living world. In the past, that connection was preserved by stories, but today, as Sarah Maitland writes, the deep connection between the forest and the core stories has been lost. Fairy stories and forests have been moved into different categories and isolated. Both are at the risk of disappearing. Misunderstood and culturally undervalued, useless in the sense of financially unprofitable. Fortunately, fantasy fiction, the heir to the traditions of myths and fairy tales, may still remind us about the spiritual value of nature. In fantasy fiction, tree and forest play vital roles and are presented as entities fundamental to the well-being of the imaginary world and its inhabitants. Staying attuned to the natural world is shown as a deeply rewarding experience because the natural world is filled with the essence of the numinous. As Chris Barley argues, fantasists seemed to perceive nature sacramentally in their own lives and use the vehicle of the mythopoeic fantasy to convey this religious sensibility towards nature to their readers. Such renditions of nature might grant readers a fresh awareness of the world around them and inspire them to discard the prevailing anthropocentrism and commoditization of nature, which corresponds to the claims that have been made by eco-criticism and post-humanism. This process of regaining awareness is what Tolkien defines as recovery, which he considers to be one of the 4 qualities of fairy stories. Recovery means that the experience of a secondary world and its marvels can positively affect the reader's perceptions of his surroundings and of the things he used to take for granted. The rediscovery of the beauty and significance of the natural world can therefore also be recognized as a part of fantastic recovery. And just one more, stay with me. I love quotes, as you may have realized here. Similarly, Maitland ends her work on a very positive note. We cannot go back to the beginning, but we can remake woodland and create new woods where the old ones have been lost. Fantasy fiction may aid modern people in recognizing the importance of trees, forests, and the entire natural world. But to paraphrase Maitland's last remark, we should not go on pining for the lost first forests of myths and fairy tales, but use our past and our narratives as inspiration for doing something for our present surroundings and for the future. So if you love any forest stories that I have not mentioned in this video, let me know. I would love to see what I missed and what I need to still read, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!